Hello everyone, welcome to CPC Miners Week 2 Power Rankings. I'm your host, Jason, aka BaconChest, and I'm here with my co-host, Jmac, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm the coach here for the CPC D-League. I coach the Waterloo Weaviles, hoping to maybe turn around next week, but you'll see where I am in the rankings this week after a tough loss. But let's
Yeah, let's start going through it. So, starting at number 16, we have Dolphin Squared and the Red Spark of Vicavolts. Dolphin had a really bad loss, once again. And the worrying thing for me is that I don't think he really learnt the lessons of last week. Last week, he threw away his Weavile when it was a big threat. And this week, he also threw away his Weavile when it was a big threat. I don't know why Weavile would ever be your response to was it a Mega Mawile? I think it was a Mega Mawile. And yeah, he clicked like Fake Out, and then I guess maybe there was like Natural Gift for like Fire Move, but I just feel like maybe use Weavile against the things that Weavile is good against, rather than trying to use it to beat um like using a Sash Weavile set. Maybe it was Endeavor actually. Does Weavile get Endeavor? I don't know. Anyway, whatever this Weavile set was, it didn't work, it got flinched, and he ended up just throwing it away for nothing when it otherwise could have put in a lot of work. Um, he then got swept by a Scrafty, which is very unfortunate. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, possibly should have had the Kebia Berry on the Sylveon to make sure that he could take the poison. On the other hand, I do understand to some extent not bringing um, anything specifically for a Scrafty beyond the fact that you just have a Sylveon on your roster, um, given that it is such a low tier threat and there were so many threats on his opponent's team. But yeah, look, I just haven't seen anything from these first 2 weeks that have indicated to me that Dolphin's going to be able to turn this around later in the season. How did you feel?
Yeah, no. Even from turn one, like the opening matchup was Weavile versus Mesprit,
Mm.
and Dolphin switched. Like you're in against a Mesprit. Click knockoff, click pursuit, get damage off. I know the Mesprit click, like it's probably going to be Colbur Berry, but
Mm.
at the same time, like what are you trying to preserve? Like are you just trying to preserve your sash?
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I would take the damage and get rid of the item,
Yeah.
but there was a time where Scrafty set up in front of the Milotic, and unfortunately Dolphin couldn't get the Scald Burn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then after getting a couple of Moxie boosts, it got a crit on Sylveon, which mattered if he was a max defense Sylveon.
Yeah, I went and did
But
some calcs on this. I'm fairly certain it wasn't a max defensive Sylveon based on the hidden power damage that it did against. I've forgotten what it clicked hidden. It clicked hidden power on something, um, and then and it hit something else neutrally. Like his opponent switched out, and yeah, the
like
damage
maybe
on that.
Decidueye?
Oh, it was hidden power onto the Porygon 2. Um,
Ah,
and yeah, so it was a neutral hidden power onto the Porygon 2, and based on that damage, it definitely wasn't max bold. I don't know. It depends. Obviously, I don't know what the Porygon 2's investment was, but assuming the Porygon 2 was max HP, then I don't think it really had any. At best, it was like max HP. In which case, the crit didn't necessarily matter. He had to be defensively invested for it to matter. So yeah, that was something where at the end of the game I'm like, wait, that crit mattered, and then I went and calced it, and I was like, maybe it didn't actually. I think, but I'd have to go and talk to the coaches to be sure. But yeah, as it stands, I
yeah,
I don't think it mattered.
yeah. If you wanted to ask Dolphin, you might have to wait 3 to 6 business days. He's definitely not right there to answer you right away.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, I don't think if there's not much that he can do um, to turn it around. He's definitely got to maybe think about his plays a little more, and definitely do a little more groundwork and prep.
yeah, yeah. I think that's probably enough. We don't want to be too harsh. So let's move on to our number 15. So this is the Texas Swallowtails, coached by Dre, who also copped another loss. And yeah, also just a very flawed team. I thought the lack of removal, which was something you pointed out in the draft analysis, is really hurting him, and particularly like he ended up just sacking a bunch of mons. Like a bunch of mons just ended up dying to rocks instead of being able to come in late game because he switched in the Confe on something, um, which meant that it couldn't get a defog off, which you know just ended the game basically. Like there was nothing he could really do after that point. It was really surprising to me that there wasn't any. They didn't. I don't know what moves were on that Confe, but it didn't click Draining Kiss. After it came in and took a hit, it didn't click Synthesis. I guess he was maybe trying to go for a defog, but yeah, that was it was a pretty tough game to watch. And yeah, I think either he needs to get rid of get some better removal, um, or just start bringing a bit more bulk in the matchups. Because yeah, at the moment this team's not looking great. He did get rid of the Hippowdon early with a really powerful Zen Headbutt from Hooper, but I don't think that really opened all that much up for him. I thought that like the rest of the team kind of dealt with Hippo reasonably well anyway, so I just wasn't sure what he necessarily was trying to achieve with that, and then he like immediately sacked off. Like the Hooper died pretty soon afterwards, I think. So yeah, I don't know about this so far. I really liked this team on first glance, but as we're seeing a bit more of it, I think your points about the lacking removal and the rocks weaknesses and the frailty of a lot of these offensive threats is really coming into play.
Yeah, like it was a very quick battle. It was, I think, 17 turns, and by not being able to remove hazards, it essentially turn 17. Ninetales died to rocks. Kyurem Black died to rock. So, like, those are two strong Pokemon of the matchup that I thought were important for Dre here. Um, Again, you keep mentioning that you should learn from your mistakes. Definitely leaving Hoopa U against a telegraphed U-turn is definitely something that Dre has done 2 weeks in a row.
Yep.
And hopefully will learn for weeks going forward to not keep it in against a 4 times effective move. I think Dre did have good prep with the Ninetales being scarfed so that it was unable to, or so that Kartana was unable to be a massive threat against his team. I think he was maybe a little crippled by switching out the Ninetales into Kyurem Black against the Azu, which clicked Superpower, which then allowed Kyurem just to die to rocks later in the game. But yeah, like, he definitely needs better removal going forward.
Yep. Yeah, I think those are pretty fair points. And yeah, I think those two teams pretty uncontroversially at 16 and 15, respectively. So moving on to number 14. This is actually the same. So we're the same for our bottom three. This is the Amarillo Azumarill, coached by Arctic something. I moved them down a couple of spots. You already had them down here at 14. So do you want to start us off in terms of Arctic?
So I think I didn't actually write a lot of notes for this match. I just wrote that Arctic was just simply outplayed and outmatched. I don't think he played well overall. I think this week he really didn't have much going for him. It was definitely a hard matchup, definitely against a well-rounded coach. I think the major flaw was the Tapu Fini Nature's Madness miss that allowed Reuniclus to sweep through his team. But other than that, he didn't really have much to take on the Reuniclus throughout the game. So I think that was a major flaw in prep.
Yeah, and I do think, given that he had the taunt on the Tapu Fini, I think he should have just gone hard into it. It's not like Reuniclus unboosted can really threaten a Tapu Fini, but instead he let it get set up a bit first and then went into Tapu Fini. And I think that really cost his ability to, reliably get rid of that thing over time. Yeah, he did miss a Nature's Madness, but I think he put himself in a position where he had to hit every Nature's Madness and he had to get all the plays right. And in the end, realistically, his opponent could have just switched out the Reuniclus and set up again later. So yeah, I think he needed, after getting a kill or two. So yeah, I think he needed to be a bit more wary of sets that are really common like that. Like a Calm Mind Reuniclus is one of the most common Reuniclus sets. Make sure you do to though, particularly, make sure that stuff like your Greninja can actually beat a Reuniclus. And, whether that's you need to run specs on the Greninja so that it can't boost up quickly enough to avoid the 2-8 KO, or whether that's, even running like Taunt on the Greninja so that he can't set up. Something like that.
Or even running like a physical set, like with Night Slash. Like
Yeah.
that could maybe do something, some big damage to a Reuniclus that's setting up Calm Minds.
Yeah, potentially, and I know this is an item that's getting a lot of use on the ladder right now, potentially doing something like a Metronome Night Slash set, because I'm not sure Night Slash would actually do that, because Grenin's attack isn't that great, but if you're Night Slash with Metronome, then it can't Calm Mind up, it can't recover up on you, and it's something that can really surprise your opponents. Something I'm gonna, and spoilers for any Majors coaches who are watching this, but it's something I'm potentially gonna try and do later this season. Just because I've seen it in a few videos recently, I'd be like, ooh, that's actually quite fun. That's quite interesting as a way to get rid of bulkier mons that are trying to set up, or bulkier mons that think they can recover stall you. So yeah, I think just thinking a little bit less just in terms of type matchups when you're prepping, and making sure that not only do you have the type advantage, but also that that mon can actually meaningfully beat what it's meant to be. But yeah, overall, not a terrible performance. I did think he actually played the Electros really well in the early game, was able to get off some big damage with it, so that was good. But yeah, it all went downhill pretty quickly from there, as Reuniclus dominated the matchup, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So, moving on, we have yourself, the Waterloo Weaviles. I had you at number 12. You put yourself at number 13. I actually thought your performance this week was pretty good. I thought that the counter Clefable was really good prep, and was really clever as a way to take down the Zorora or the Mega Altaria that could have come. Obviously, and this is something you pointed out in the game, that someone convinced you to go soft boiled over Wish, which meant you couldn't be unaware. Obviously, unaware was the set to go, especially if you're running counter, so that you can always check the Mega Altaria, even if it was at +6, you could take the return and counter it back. Or things like Work Up Zorora, which Kara's already showing that she really likes to run. I do think the lack of recovery with Skarmory and Mega Era, I don't know if you had, I assume you had Roost on at least one of those, but not clicking Roost throughout the game did hurt you, and I understand in a lot of those cases you were, trying to avoid, being offensively pressured, or you were thinking, if I Roost, then maybe I'll lose this Mon, but I do think in the end they kind of were too weak to really stop what they needed to stop in terms of the Volcarona and the Mega Altaria in the late game, and yeah, that did hurt a bit, but overall, even though this was quite a comprehensive loss in comparison to your week 1 loss, which was a little bit haxy and quite close, I did actually think overall there was a bit more promise being shown here, in that you were up against a team that's very powerful, and I thought you were able to show that your prep is pretty solid, and that some of your plays were pretty good and you were able to stay in the game. But yeah, I think it's going to be a long road back from 0-2, but I reckon with this team that you should be able to at least manage to get back up to 500, and then we'll see how you can go from there.
Yeah, like I definitely had a tough matchup. Like we talked about in the majors recording, Rise Pool bringing Taunt and Sub Keldeo
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
against Suicune.
Mm.
Uh, it was kind of the same thing that Kara brought against me. Like Cobalion was definitely a good Pokemon to check something like Skarmory with Taunt, and then can easily pivot around with something like Volt Switch.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely a good bring back Kara, and there were a couple of times throughout the game where I would click Rocks or click Roost or against the Cobalion,
Mm-hmm.
and immediately trying to cancel the move because I was like, oh, I'm about to get taunted, and then just shaking my head because I was like, well, that was a misplay. Um, yeah, there were times throughout that game where I was like, I am playing on the back foot and I don't know how to get out of this. Um, like originally in my prep, I had Swampert as my check for Volcarona.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it could uh, definitely 1v1 the Volcarona, even if it was a Giga Drain set.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I could live a +1 Giga Drain 100% of the time, even after rocks.
Mm-hmm.
But I was convinced otherwise
Mm.
to not bring that set.
Yeah.
Um, probably going forward, I should probably just go with my gut when it comes to prep, and maybe not ask around to multiple people. But in my notes here, all I said was Volcarona beat me over the head. Cobalion was definitely a good stall breaker for Kara,
Mm-hmm.
and the matchup overall was just a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, and she got so much utility out of that Cobalion because she also was able to get off big damage on the Zygarde by having the Sugar Berry and HP Ice. So, yeah, that Cobalion plus Volcarona really like were the crucial mons I felt in the matchup. Um, and yeah, we're really able to put in a lot of work. Um, but yeah, I think overall I've actually bumped you up. That was more on the basis of other people having really poor performances, but I did think there was a little bit of promise in your performance that maybe you'll deliver on in future weeks. I guess no spoilers or no spoilers for week 3, but we'll see how we go when we come back for our next video um, for the D League. So moving on. We have the Monterey Suicunes, coached by Jed Swally. I had these guys at number 13. You had them at number 12. Um, the ranking here, there's another one where I forgot to change my plus, minus, I believe. But that's okay. Um, these guys copped a loss this week, and yeah, it was pretty bad, to be honest. um, Very comprehensive. Left an Amoonguss in on a Mega Gallade, which, given that Amoonguss was the only response that he had to Keldeo, was really bad. And just a little bit of inexperience showing through here in a couple of things. So there was firstly thinking that V-Create from the Victini onto the Mega Gallade was a roll, when Mega Gallade is almost always going to run bulk. Because it can afford to, because it doesn't need to invest fully in attack, and it often doesn't even need to invest fully in speed. Particularly in this matchup where, it doesn't really need to outspeed Tauros and Heliolisk to be effective against a lot of the bulkier stuff on this roster. And so, yeah, that was a little bit of an experience in the draft format, and then also I don't know what he was trying to do with that Dusknoir, but having Power Up Punch plus Seismic Toss, I don't know if he thought that was going to increase the power of Seismic Toss, but obviously it does not. And it was just a weird set. Like, Dusknoir has one role, it's pretty good at being a defensive check to things, and I don't know why he's trying to offensively set up with it. But yeah, I think this team looked very light on for offensive pressure that it could output. And yeah, the inexperience that was showing through. is why I sort of had this team down. I think that should be a -3 actually. I think I had him at 10 last week. Um, yeah, down at 13, just because even though this team has a win, I don't necessarily see it picking up many more wins unless he's able to really quickly brush up on prep, brush up on game mechanics, and solidify the play a bit more moving forward.
Yeah, like just to see his prep from week 1 versus me to what he brought week 2, it was 2 different worlds.
Yeah.
Like one prep was pretty good, and
Mhm.
this prep was unable to really mount any offensive pressure. Like
Mhm.
Grant had all the momentum all the time,
Mhm.
and Jed could do nothing.
Yep.
Like, it was just surprising to even see Jed get one Pokemon down on Grant's team.
Mm.
And you could see mid-game where he was just so excited not to be 6-0'd.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks more volumes that, like, even getting 5-0'd, like, you were just definitely out-prepped and outplayed. So I really hope that Jed can turn it around, and like you said, brush up on a couple of things.
Yep. Yep. Alright. That's probably enough about Jed. Let's move on to Panda and the Carolina Pancham. I had these guys down at number 11. You had them at number 9. How about you talk about Panda first?
So I think Panda had a lot of hacks against him,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which made the battle look a lot more difficult to come back from.
Mm-hmm.
He really couldn't do anything against the baton pass Mega Lopunny that Rin brought,
Mm.
as it allowed Xurkitree just to freely pivot around his team, as Xurkitree had a lot of offensive pressure against. I think Robert should have brought hazards to limit what Rin could have brought this week.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, I think it was just maybe just a weaker prep from Robert.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I hope he can do well moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was interesting talking about the hacks where the main thing that seemed crucial at the time was the crit on Mega Camel. Um, but when I looked at it, I was like, well, it did 74, so I don't know what the exact sets were on those two mons, but without a crit, um, that's potentially still a roll to do it KO. And so I was like, I don't necessarily know that I feel like the luck mattered too much there, because it was probably going to come down to luck either way, regardless. Um, Potentially. I mean, obviously, maybe 74 was a max roll crit, and therefore it could have only done 49 without a crit, for example. But I'm not sure. Um, yeah, the other thing I felt was he lost a lot of momentum turn 1 by switching out the Archeops from the Megalopunny. I thought Megalopunny is such an obvious lead, so either be willing to take the fake out. Obviously it does take you closer to defeatist range, but it's not going to put you in defeatist range the first time. So just be willing to take that, or run something odd like you could have had protect on that Archeops if it is going to be a dedicated lead, just to stop you from taking that fake out damage. But either way, it just meant that the Lop was able to get off big damage early in the game, when realistically, Archeops with acrobatics should be able to threaten something like a Lopunny. Potentially depending on the set. So, I don't know, it just felt like he put himself back early in the game. He did get a defog off later in the game with Archeops, and you'll notice this one's just for you, Panda. I did include defog on the list of options for Archeops. Now, I didn't have it there initially, mostly just because I didn't pay that much attention to Archeops when I was quickly going through and adding all the options for different Pokemon, but it is there now. You successfully defogged with an Archeops, well done. But yeah, like a little bit unlucky, depending on sets, but I don't know if it made too much of a difference in the long run. I think, yeah, as you were saying, the Xurkitree plus Megalopunny with Baton Pass was just so powerful, and was just able to threaten this team really badly throughout the game. And yeah, Rin prepped really well, which we'll get into a little bit more later. So moving on, um, we have Sacred Wings and the Houston Absol. Hard to know what to say about Sacred. He's 2-0 at +2. He's kind of the reverse Will from the majors, where Will 0-2, -2, two really hacksy losses. Sacred is the complete opposite, 2-0 +2, two really hacksy wins. Um, yeah, I mean, I've written in my notes, this is why power rankings exist. Like, this team is 2-0, I've got it at number 8, you've got it at number 11. And I think that's a reasonable choice, even though the team is 2-0, because, yeah, he's been quite lucky. I thought the prep this week was pretty solid, and he had some responses for, like, less common sets, but in the end, probably should have taken the L. Probably should have taken the L last week as well. Um, yeah, we'll see if Sacred can take advantage of this start and, go on to have a really good season, but so far it's, still a lot of questions over whether Sacred can keep this up in weeks where the luck does not go quite as much in his favor.
Yeah, like to win week 1 from a high jump kick miss, and then I don't even remember how he won in week 2. But like I have here, Sacred was super unlucky, was super lucky and undeserving of a win. From a prep standpoint,
Mhm.
I thought it was really funny to see Inferno overdrive Wigglytuff.
Yeah,
and I think Wigglytuff was just
he did use the Wigglytuff really well, which I was impressed by. So, props for that.
like really well, like really really well. He was able to get the rocks up, and that was able to stay on the field throughout. Um, yeah, just and then being able to preserve Suicune and Klefki in the late game just to be able to stall out the late game was definitely good on Sacred's part. But yeah, no, I think he was just undeserving of a win. Like, he's definitely been getting really lucky, and I hope that his play either improves or that his luck runs out by the time playoffs come.
Yeah, I think he's almost. I talked a bit before about how he was the reverse Will. He's also a little bit the reverse Volume, where we were talking before about how Volume's been playing really well in the early game and struggling to close out games. Sacred's been kind of the opposite, where I feel like his early games have been really bad, and then he's been just holding on and putting himself in a position where Suicune can stall out his opponent in both games so far. And it's paid off, but I don't think it'll continue to pay off every week because, as we've seen earlier when we were talking about majors and how, you can use things like sub-taunt Keldeo to stop Suicune from walling things. There are options to beat Suicune. It's not an unbeatable mon. So yeah, I do expect some L's to come. But we'll see if he can, solidify his play, because if he can, he's in a really good position to push for playoffs, being 2-0 already. But yeah, moving on to our next coach, we have Slick Panther and the Cleveland S-Cavaliers, not the Carolina S-Cavaliers, as I unfortunately wrote in the previous PowerPoint. I had these guys at number 7. You had them at number 8. Big drop for both of us. I had them at number 2 last week. You had them at number 1. Do you want to talk us through Slick Panther?
So I think that Slick was definitely under prepped for some of the threats that Zombie could have brought.
Mm-hmm.
Having his Thundy Eye being outsped by a Mimikyu was definitely something that played into Zombie's favor this week. I think overall, Slick didn't play as well as he could have.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a tough game to play overall, I think, versus Zombie, who is definitely a to fear this season. Um, but yeah, like the funny thing too, like he immediately called us on the power rankings from last week. He was, my team name is Cleveland, not Carolina, guys. Right. So maybe that was still weighing on him this week, which maybe made him miss prep a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, I do think not bringing Heatran when your opponent has a Mimikyu is a little bit questionable because Heatran's just so reliable at taking down Mimikyu. Generally, I did feel like he needed to go a bit bulkier here because whilst I think this team generally is going to run offense against in most matchups, this was probably one of the very, very few matchups where, Zombie just out offensed him. He had better hyper offense options in this matchup. And so something to work on, I guess, for Slick in future is to recognize in a matchup where you can't do your just basic strategy of being able to set up and blow back teams. That's going to work most times, but it's not going to work against in some matchups. He didn't really have the opportunities to set up that he got in week one, and yeah, without potential hazard stack options. I talked in our previous video about how he doesn't have like spikes or T spikes to you know whittle things down for the late game. I do feel like he needed to potentially go a bit bulkier, just so he could tank some hits and revenge back. Because there's a lot of mons here, like stuff like Curum, that if you build the right set can be bulky, take a hit, and just blow something back in return. And he was up against a very hyper offensive squad, so I think that kind of strategy could have worked here. Um, but yeah, in the end, was just kind of like it was a very quick and entertaining game, and he was just kind of blown back a little bit by Zombie's team. And yeah, as you said, Thunderous being outsped by Mimikyu, that's really questionable. I get speed creeping, but don't go that aggressive with your speed creep. Make sure you're outspeeding things that otherwise could potentially destroy your team, especially when you're not bringing your best response to a Mimikyu in the form of Heatran to the matchup. So yeah, a little bit questionable there. But overall, I still expect this team to go pretty well throughout the season, but we'll see how Slick can adapt to different styles of opposing teams rather than just going for the same, you know, mass setup options with stuff like Thunderous and Mega Gara.
Right. Like, so I'm just looking at Zombie's team right now.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you have your Thunderous outspeed something like a Mega Char X or a Manaphy? Like, those are two Pokemon that you should probably think to yourself, yeah, it's probably smart to outspeed those Pokemon. And then even the Lycanroc Dusk at 110. Like, sure, you're taking a lot from the Accelerock,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely think about outspeeding that Pokemon as well. So it's
Yeah.
just something to keep in mind going forward.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's move on. Next up, we have Matt Metagross and the Washington Red Skitty. Matt was able to pick up a win with Reuniclus, which we've already talked about. Picked up a bunch of kills with it. Identified his win con in prep. Did well to set up for it. I thought he played the early game a little bit poorly, as I kind of referenced earlier. I don't think Electros really should have been that much of a problem for this team, but he kind of made it into a problem. Um, and yeah, Tangrowth didn't do too much. He had HP Ice on it, which, if you're not Assault Vest, I don't actually necessarily rate HP Ice that highly in this matchup because whilst obviously it does a lot to Landorus, a Landorus is probably not going to stay in on a Tangrowth, and it's never going to come in on a Tangrowth. So realistically, you're getting HP Ice damage off on something like the Lati, and that's not doing anything because Tangrowth doesn't have it has okay special attack, but it's never going to be invested in it. Um, so I do think if you're not Assault Vest, stuff like Leech Seed or Sleep Powder could have offered a bit more utility in this matchup. That said, like I did think he played pretty well. Focused, went for the early win, got the early win, and was just able to kind of finish off the game really quickly, rather than drawing it out into the late game, which is good because last week, the game went really long, and he did eventually lose. So yeah, like I think this team will do pretty well, but we'll see how he can go in some tougher matchups moving forward.
Yeah, like just overall, like he did get unlucky week one, missing a high jump. But Matt's a good coach. I've seen him play in a few other leagues. I think I've even played against him a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
He's a coach that knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So to get this win underneath his belt and maybe shake off the jitters by being in the CPC, he'll be able to turn it around quite easily. It was definitely like there's not much to say about this match other than Reuniclus did quite a good job, and the Nature's Madness miss was definitely something that was in his favor to preserve the 4-0 victory.
Yeah. Yep, all good. So let's move on. Next up, we have Mid and the Kentucky Torcats. This is, I think, our biggest differential this week. I had these guys at number 4. You had them at number 10, which is very harsh in my opinion. But do you want to talk about Mid first and tell me what your thoughts are?
So I think Mid might have showed his cards a little too early in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like how he led with the Entei versus the Wigglytuff. It kind of exposed his set immediately, being the Power Herb Caliente set. That might have been something interesting in the mid to late game versus Suicune because he maybe could have caught it third. I think setting up with Halucha was maybe not super necessary. Like I say it was a good play, but like unnecessary given that Suicune and Klefki were still around.
Yeah.
I know that it was the last turn of Terrain from Coco. But to have something like Suicune and Klefki, like you could probably set up on both of those Pokemon relatively easily without having the terrain boost, and there was nothing else on Sacred's team that could outspeed from that point, I believe. Yeah, I think there was just a couple of things that maybe Mid didn't do well. And then I don't think I liked from week 2. I forget who he played. But
so week 2 is his matchup versus Sacred.
Week 1, I mean.
Yeah, week 1. Week 1 he picked up a pretty solid win. He was up against whichever team has Ferrothorn and Seismitoad, which is the Texas.
So he was up against Swallowtails. Yeah.
I thought his win in week 1 was pretty solid. But I did want to talk about actually, in regards to his week 1 game versus his week 2 game, he's brought offensive Cofagrigus both times, and I didn't rate the bring this week. I think he's getting a little bit predictable, bringing a kind of lower tier offensive threat. We talked about this a little bit in the Majors video with regards to Henry and his reliance on Crawdont. I think Mid is doing a similar thing with Cofagrigus, and I don't understand that Cofagrigus set at all, because if Sacred had brought the Komodo with Bulletproof, it literally just walled, because I believe it was Nasty Plot, Shadow Ball, Energy Ball. I can't remember what its 4th move was, but probably it wasn't something that hits a Komodo, and that's just 100% walled, even if he didn't have the Wigglytuff, which obviously also takes not that much from Energy Ball and is immune to the Shadow Ball. So, yeah, I am not sure that the setup Cofagrigus was a good idea. I didn't mind the fact that he set up early with the Entei. Obviously, if you do run multiple setup mons, you might want to set up early and then try and break something so that something else can sweep later. That said, I don't understand why he went for Solar Beam on the turn that he did. It was so obvious that he had it. And, the fact that Sacred had brought in Starmie instead of bringing in Suicune screams out that he either has Protect or he has Substitute. Because otherwise you bring out the Suicune, because obviously that's the much safer and more predictable kind of option against the Entei, because it could, roar you out, it can Protect, it can Sub. Those are very common moves on that. Whereas on Starmie, it's maybe a little bit less common, but the fact that he brought it in indicates that he's got some way of stopping Solar Beam, even if it was like a Rindo Berry, for example, it could have been. If he wanted the Starmie to, for some reason, take on Lurantis, I don't know. But regardless, he did 40% with Flamethrower, so he could have just clicked Flamethrower again and knocked out the Starmie, or he could have Calm Minded, and that way, at that point, Flamethrower is a 2-hit KO if you're worried about the Starmie trying to recover stall you. Either of those plays guarantee that you 1v1 the Starmie, whereas Solar Beam was the only play where it ended up being like they both kind of took each other out. And yeah, that was a big problem with the way that he played that early game. That said, he still got a bit unlucky here and possibly should have won the game anyway. But yeah, I think there were some flaws in prep, so I did knock him down a peg, but I didn't knock him down too far because, yeah, I thought his win in week 1 was pretty impressive and, was a little unlucky to not beat Sacred this week. So, we'll see whether it's the impressive week 1 win or the kind of slightly more questionable week 2 plays that define his season.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I want to add is that I think there are that had better games than Mid did. So maybe that's why I have him so low.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I rated his week 1 game that highly, given where we had his opponent during the week 0 rankings, kind of near the bottom, whereas Mid was kind of up near the top. So, and then just to even have the chance to get counter swept in that game was definitely something that I think I took from note from week 1.
Okay, yeah.
For Mid.
Yeah, that's probably fair. Alright, let's move on to our next team. We have the Seattle Soul Blaze, and this is the reverse of the previous team. So this is Bash. You have it at number 4. I had him at number 10. I really punished Bash for his week 1 performance, which I thought was pretty poor. And kind of, yeah, like didn't show enough respect for the options that his opponent had. But that said, this was a really good performance, and I think this, I expect to see him moving up the rankings further from here, and I expect probably our rankings on this one will converge as the season goes on. But that said, I thought he used a low tier threat in the form of Scrafty really well. I don't even really know that he needed to switch out the Mega Mawile from the Sylveon, because probably it takes a Hidden Power Fire, surely. I didn't actually do the calc, but I assume it takes a Hidden Power Fire and then Sylveon just disappears, and then you don't have anything stopping Scrafty from sweeping, so could have actually won it even cleaner, I think, than what he actually did. But that said, impressive victory. Not really a lot to say aside from that. I guess the other main reason why I haven't got this team ranked any higher, even though it was quite a good win, is that it was against the number 16 team, and I think a pretty conclusive number 16. And yeah, so I'd want to see him beat some more highly ranked teams that give him a bit more pressure and give him a bit tougher of a battle before I move him up into those kind of top echelons of the rankings. But that said, it's a really strong team. If he continues to play well, I'm sure he'll be moving up these rankings. So, yeah, what about you in regards to Bash?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think he maybe didn't prep as well week 1 for the trip set up with the Marowak. But I think he had a great bounce back week and truly showed his dominance as a battler. There wasn't really any point in the game where I was like, oh, Bash is going to lose another Pokemon. Like, once I saw this Crafty set up, I was like, yeah, this is Bash going to win. Like, this is the game right here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I think he's definitely a dominant battler. We'll see, like you said before in the majors, whether the week 1 loss is the tail of his season, or whether this game here versus Dolphin was something that would let him win in the future.
Yeah, definitely. All right, moving on. Next up, we have Spoink and the Des Moines Delibird. I had these guys at number 6. You had them at number 7. Do you want to take us through Spoink first?
So I think Spoink was maybe a little taken aback by how much damage Hippo was doing the Hippo in the early game.
Mm-hmm.
But then saw his opportunity to set up with Tana,
Mm-hmm.
which then he was surprised yet again. I think those two things were kind of something that set him back in the early game,
Mm-hmm.
but he definitely turned around his game by predicting the switch into a Kyurem Black by clicking Superpower.
Yep.
And then just showing everyone how strong Braviary is to pick up the last 3 kills in the game on turn 17.
Yeah, definitely. Put in a lot of work with Braviary, which is good because it's one of those mons where it can do nothing on a team, but it can do a lot. And yeah, I think we're seeing both in majors and minors that coaches are putting it to work. So that's good to see. It's America Bird putting in some work. I thought losing the Hippo so early in the game could have been a real concern because there's not a lot of bulk on this team. But the terrifying offensive cores, so yeah, the Kartana, the Lele, the Braviary, the Azumarill, were just able to put in a lot of work and pick him up in the end a pretty comfortable victory. So yeah, like rocks plus enough power to take advantage of those rocks was enough in the end. And yeah, like in the end, Hippo was really only needed to get up those rocks, and then it didn't really matter from that point. I don't have too much to say about Spoink. I think he played well. I think he deserves to be in this top half, and I think he got a little bit unlucky in week 1. So I expect, based on the plays so far that he's made in week 1 and week 2, that he's going to pick up quite a few wins throughout the season, based on the strength of his team and the fairly high quality of his play so far.
I agree. I'm really hoping to see Aaron come to one in the later season.
Yeah, definitely. I think Aaron, as far as 1 point meme mons go, it's definitely better than Amora. So we'll see if it can pull out some tricks later on in the season. Moving on, we have Rinnigan and the OKC Thunderclaps. I had these guys at number 3. You had them at number 6. In both cases, we moved them up quite a bit. After a pretty impressive performance, really. We've talked a bit about this already, but yeah, I was very impressed by the Lopunny baton pass into sub Xurkitree. I thought that was a really clever way to take advantage of the Alomomola, which is obviously a very, very safe switch in to Mega Lopunny. And usually, even if you can predict that, you're not gaining a lot out of that turn because you predict it, and then they go out to Aloe, and then they can either, absorb a hit and then switch out to regenerate, or they can just, switch out and regenerate anyway. So, yeah, usually it's a real struggle with Megalop against an Aloe, but having Baton Pass, having the Xurkitree, really, really solid. Was able to do it a couple of times throughout the game, and particularly, I thought, took really good advantage of Healing Wish. The access to Healing Wish through both Jirachi and potentially Mega Lopunny as well is really nice for things like the Xurkitree. Potentially, you could do the same with things like the Nidoqueen or even the Tapu Bulu. So yeah, I think showed some options on this team this week that will stand him in good stead moving forward. And he also just kind of finessed his way around having no real bulk on the team quite well. I talked last week about how he looked a bit reliant on support Jirachi, and that might make his team prove a little bit one-dimensional. I still think his team is a little reliant on that Jirachi, but I think he played around that very well and has picked up two really pretty solid wins. Picked up a win after overcoming an early deficit in week one, and picked up a pretty convincing win here with some really clever sets. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing Rinnigan throughout the season, how far he can go with this team.
Yeah, like from our week 0, I think we had 16 because he lacked a lot of good removal.
Mm.
But the way that Rinnigan has played so far throughout this season, it hasn't really shown that hazards are a crutch to his team.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like even this week versus Robert, Robert didn't really take advantage. So Rinnigan was able to just pivot around freely and get the upper hand throughout the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned support Jirachi being a crutch for this team, and funny enough, it did come this week in the form of Healing Wish, which allowed Zergatry to be able to get back into the game after being at like 2%, I think, in the mid game. So, like, if Robert was able to get hazards up, that would have crippled that Jirachi set immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But since there were no hazards in the game, it was just up to Rinnigan to gain that momentum with the baton pass on low punny or the switch from Zergatry, or even just predicting a good double. Yeah, overall, I think this was a very, very good week for Rinnigan.
Yeah. Moving into our top handful of coaches. So next up we have the Victoria Victinis, coached by Zombie. This team might be 1-1, but as we talked a little bit about earlier, had a very convincing win this week against a pretty solid opponent. And, lost in week 1 to another really solid opponent in another quite close game. So yeah, I think has done pretty well. I think it was the battle of the two sort of premier hyper offensive teams in this conference, and Zombie just blew back Bash's team. Bash or Slick? Wait, who was his opponent this week?
This week was Slick.
Slick. Blew back Slick's team. With just offense pulling through. I thought the prep was really solid, and I think this team is very, very scary and is going to be tough for other teams to match up against moving forward. So, yeah, I expect Zombie to continue to pick up wins. Got him at number 5 this week because, it's still only a 1-1 record, but certainly of the 1-1 teams, I think probably the most likely to threaten for those top 2 or 3 spots.
Yeah, like I think maybe having him as low as 5 was maybe a little harsh given the hacks in week 1 versus who we both have as our top coach for this week of the power rankings. But yeah, I think Zombie overall had a great matchup versus Slick, and showed Slick that, he's not afraid to overpower him and play the upper hand and just overall be the better battler. We definitely might have the crutch of the bulk, being Gliscor and Umbreon. Like, those two Pokemon really need to come maybe every other week just to give Zombie the options to have that longevity. But overall, I think Zombie is definitely, and it's unfortunate that he's in my.
yeah. I'll be interested to see how you try and take on his team when that matchup does come up. So moving on to the team that I believe is the number 2 overall when you combine our rankings this week. So this is Granto and the Liverpool Littons. And we've talked a little bit about his game already. I just thought, yeah, it was a really solid performance, and I thought, he had some really good prep. So things like safety goggles on the Crobat, so that it was a guaranteed switch into Amoonguss every single time, was really nice. And used the combination of rocks and knockoff to really pressure the switch-ins that his opponent had. Yeah, I had no real complaints, and I think this team is very strong. I think Grant's done really well, and I think, yeah, that's, really probably the top two. It's like strong teams, both 2-0, have shown some good prep and some good play. Can't really put them below anyone else just on the basis of those things. But yeah, really, really solid performance from Grant this week.
Yeah, I agree. I really, really liked the safety goggles Crobat. It just hardwalled Amoonguss, period. That was just a great prep on his part. And then even having Mega Gallade with the amount of bulk that it had to live a V-Create from Victini. That was another thing that came up with my match versus Jed week 1. I had enough bulk on my Mega Aerodactyl to live a Bolt Strike from 100%. But unfortunately, that match, I missed a Stone Edge, so that got Arrow chipped down a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think overall, just being able to bring that extra amount of bulk, it allows teams throughout the league to get the upper hand on their opponents. And Grant definitely took advantage of it this week.
Yeah, definitely. And he's got some mons that really do take advantage of those kinds of sets, like Gallade, Keldeo, Garchomp are all mons where, you don't always need max speed, you don't always need max attack or max special attack. You can run a lot of HP, you can run a very defensive set. I know I once lost a game entirely on the basis of my opponent having a max HP, max speed Gallade, where I thought, oh no, it's okay, either I will outspeed, and therefore, I'll be able to hit them twice, or they'll outspeed, but then they won't have enough bulk to live a hit. And they had both, because Mega Gallade is just that good of a mon. So, yeah, it's a really good mon to prep with if you know how to use the full extent of its options. Particularly, it's got a very deep move pool with things like Will-O-Wisp. So, yeah, I expect to see this team do very well moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I really...
Oh, I think I've lost your audio. Hello?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep, yeah, you're back.
Okay. Darn, you're going to have to edit this.
Yeah, that's all good. Alright, moving forward to... Yes, our number 1 team, unanimous number 1 pick this week, which is the San Antonio Spikes, coached by Simeon. And yeah, Kara had quite a good week. And yeah, I think there was probably only really one play that I questioned, where she clicked Protect. I can't remember which mon it was with, but she clicked Protect with the Mega Arrow on the other side of the field. Do you remember what mon it was that she clicked Protect with? Was it Silvally or?
I don't remember. It might have been Savali.
Yeah.
Maybe she was looking for an Earthquake or something.
Yeah, I think she was scouting for Earthquake, but I just thought, because you had the arrow at, I want to say it was 45 or 50% at that point. And I was like, oh, yeah, obvious play here is to go for Roost. And if you'd gone for Roost there, then, I don't know if you had Roost on that set, but if you'd gone for Roost, that would have put her back a fair bit in terms of trying to sweep late game with something like the Volcarona, which I've just realized I don't have the updated roster for Kara on screen right now. I'll make sure to get that fixed for next time. But yeah, like overall, aside from that, I thought she played quite well. I think her team's really strong, and she showed off. She showed off the Mega Altaria last week. She showed off the Volcarona this week, um, and using the Zorora really well. So yeah, like we'll see. I think that this season, the top handful of coaches are all really strong, and I think someone will knock her off eventually. But we'll see who it is. And until then, I think she's probably going to remain at number one for me because I do just really, really like this team. As long as she keeps picking up wins, I don't think she'll be moving very much from the top of the power rankings.
That's fair. She has been playing quite well, and she definitely showed me how good Volcarona can be against me, for sure. I definitely maybe took her for granted a little bit, so I probably won't be doing that for any of the forward.
Mm.
But yeah, she played quite well. I can't really argue with anything that she did. She outplayed me. She outprepped me. She had a great week.
Yep. And yeah, that brings us to the end of our D-League Power Rankings for Week 2. Hope you've all enjoyed this video. If you have, please leave a like, drop a comment. We'll be back with probably we may end up skipping Week 3 and maybe going straight to Week 4 for D-League, depending on how our schedules work out. But we'll definitely be back with videos in the future for both the D-League and for the Majors. So I hope you are all enjoying those. And until next time, we will see you guys. No. That made no sense. Until next time, we'll see you guys next time. That makes no sense. But yeah, we will see you guys next time.